Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. This is, the episode of the show for Season 1, Episode 5 of The Last of Us on HBO. We're pleased to gather with you. Now, this episode was a little interesting because it actually aired earlier than it should have in its schedule to avoid the Super Bowl. I just want to say I found that a little peculiar because it's just, you can just watch it anytime. Like, what's the big deal if it's on after the Super? I guess I just was a little confused by that. But nonetheless, they did that. So we're coming in at our normal slot here on a Tuesday. So the episode wasn't yesterday, it was a few days ago. We'll be back, keeping the schedule as it returns back to its Sundays. I just wanted to note that in case anyone was curious. But this episode, I really liked a lot. And I'm curious what you guys think about it. Let's get everyone introduced first and foremost, though. Dagan.
Yo.
Dagan Moriarty, my brother. Welcome back to the show. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing good. I'm wearing shorts today, which shouldn't matter, but I'm not a big shorts guy, and it feels weird. You won't see that, but for me, it's like, I'm in kind of like I got to adapt another mindset here, not being in long pants.
Right. Pantaloons.
A little peek
Why did we
behind the
stop
curtain.
calling them Why did we stop calling them pantaloons?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Breeches.
Breeches.
Breeches. Right.
Breeches, yeah.
Micah uses the word often because we love Downton Abbey, so she uses the word luncheon a lot, which I'm like, why did we stop saying that word?
Luncheon is a good one. That's a good one.
Would you like to have luncheon?
In my breeches?
Unforgettable luncheon.
In my britches. Oh, Christopher. All right.
Christopher.
Dustin Furman, executive
Hello.
producer. How are you today, my friend?
I'm feeling good. So last night was the Super Bowl, and a lot of people will be listening to this before Constellation, but small spoiler, Dagan asked about the game at the end, and I realized I didn't even know who was in it at the time we were recording. And last night, I felt I had some FOMO about it, and it wasn't about the game at all, but we were eating dinner, and we were just we were having basic breakfast stuff, which, don't get me wrong, basic breakfast, some over easy eggs, toast, bacon, it's all good stuff. But
breakfast
I was thinking,
for dinner.
Yeah, breakfast
Yeah,
for
I
dinner.
love that.
Nice.
I love it.
It's good, but I was thinking, man, it would be kind of nice to be at a party right now, just eating copious amount of wings and pizza and beer and stuff like that. But I literally don't know anybody who was watching the game and having a party. So I was just at home. We watched the first Harry Potter movie and
Were you the Unabomber? Do you not know anyone?
No one invited me to a party.
You're in the right
Nobody.
state, right? Like, it's 6 hours away, but at least you're in the right state.
Definitely the wrong part of the state, but yeah.
You're the wrong part of the
I'm
state.
sure that people I knew were watching it, but nobody invited me to their Super Bowl party. So maybe it's a me problem, actually.
Yeah,
Deep
maybe.
down.
I respect that. I appreciate when people don't tune into things. Like, I have a very distinct memory of Greg not watching the Super Bowl one year to play Heavy Rain.
Oh.
And I was like, well, I at least respect.
It's a baller move.
It's like, I respect what you're doing, I guess. You're making a statement. But
here's the thing, though. There are people that try to make a statement. They go on Twitter and what's going on tonight? Look at me. I'm watching Harry Potter. That's what I could have done.
Yeah.
But I just mind. I'm telling you now because I'm feeling like, man, I wish I had some chicken wings. That was how I felt.
I like it. Let your nerd credentials fly next time, Dust.
Sure.
It's okay. It's okay.
Maybe
I like your
I won't say sports ball, though.
No.
Oh my God. If you stay, I'll fire you on the spot. I really will. If anyone earnestly says sports ball on this show, they're fired. They're
That's
fired.
cringe. 100%.
Hey, throw down the goal. It's fine.
My dearest one,
Hello.
Micah Watson,
Hey.
how are you?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Dustin, stand down.
I'm hurt.
Oh,
Micah, how are you today, my friend?
I'm doing very well, and it's fitting that we're talking about the NFL because I feel like you had an NFL announcer moment right at the top when you said we're coming in our normal slot on a Tuesday.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
and
man.
I mean, geez, it's the things the announcers say that have so many double meanings. Like, did you have to say
what was that
Colin?
one we
did
were
you have
laughing-
to lead in with that?
What was the one we were laughing about that was like hysterical?
The one that happened a couple of months ago?
Yeah.
It was actually an Eagles game. and it was Landon Dickerson. And I think it was Chris Collingsworth said, "That's a taste of Landon Dickerson right down your throat."
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Because he like tackled someone really hard.
Multiple
and
times on a Sunday.
That was what he said.
Multiple times on a Sunday, we're like, what did he just say? Like about one of the announcers. Like it's something insane. Because they're always talking about coming in
Coming behind.
Like it's just like, what is going on with this? Very sexually charged.
It's horrible.
Commentary.
Not on
Gets me a little
purpose,
hot.
though.
A lot. Like, I'll be honest with you, it makes me a little hot when I'm watching football. Yeah.
Sure.
So, by the way, I just totally forgot about this. I guess I was a little stoned last night when we were going to bed, and what happened last night? I was like, so I was getting into bed between 4 and 5, but I was looking at the memes channel, and there was a meme in there. I was fucking dying. I woke her up like by laughing and just being like cackling.
Yeah.
Was it as funny as I thought it was? I actually remember what it was. I'm going to look it up while you talk.
It was a really funny meme. It was the one that said
I'm going to bring it up.
Yeah. Jamie, bring this up. But it was a funny meme. But here's what happened. I wake up to the sound of what I think is crying. And I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned. And I'm like, but like, I'm also like, I just woke up. And then I hear the cackling. And I was just like, he's fine. Okay, never mind. Crisis averted.
I don't know if this will come through. I'm putting it on the camera for everyone. Just so they can see it. And then I'll figure out a way to link. How do I link everyone to it? I'm gonna save it, and then we're doing it real time. Dustin,
meme.
I'm sending it to you.
In the footnotes, it says meme.
I'm sending it to you via text.
Okay.
Anyway, this text had me, and I'll send it to Dagan too, just so he has. Do you have your phone with you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm sending you this had me dying for probably 15 minutes. And I don't know if I was just like in space or whatever. It's so good. I was crying. So I think I probably was like fucked up.
Yeah, the weed and the 5 a.m. definitely helped.
Yeah.
But that's good. That's a good one. I'll put myself in your place. Wow. A little high, a little late.
I couldn't stop.
That's hilarious.
Anyway.
That image is too much.
Let's talk about more serious things. The HBO show, The Last of Us.
Let's do this.
This is a really interesting episode. I enjoyed it. I really feel like a lot of this episode is different, obviously, than what happens in the game, and ends kind of in a similar way, I suppose. But we get a lot more texture about these two characters than we ever do in the game, which is interesting. And I would argue that Henry is a bad guy, almost certainly. And I don't remember that being the case in the game. He was a bad guy in the game because he actually betrays you at some point or like leaves you for dead, but which doesn't happen in the show. But anyway, I liked like the way they kind of played with this and played with Ellie's youth and just a lot of things, quiet moments, hideouts, ish. Ooh.
Oh, I knew you were going to bring up the ish.
Dagan, what were your thoughts, your high level 2 miles up thoughts of The Last of Us's 5th episode?
I really enjoyed it. I got to, I took advantage of being, having the extra couple of days, being that it debuted on Friday night. So I got to watch it twice and soak it in. And watching it twice helped me to like it even more. I think this was a really good episode. Lots of pulls that we could discuss from this episode. And I think, Kyle, you'll be our tour guide for the key beats. But I'll tell you what my biggest takeaway was with this episode by the very end. Is that now like Mason and Druckmann absolutely definitively established that no punches will be pulled in this world. This was pretty brutal, absolutely mercilessly brutal ending. I was actually shocked of how it ended and how everything took that turn in like a 20 to 30 second interval and ended on such a dark beat that I was like, wow, we have to really prepare ourselves that this is just going to be, this is just going to reflect the brutality of this world and things are going to be bleak. There's a lot leading up to that, but walking away from this episode, I couldn't believe the emotional roller coaster it was, but it just ended on that sour note. And I was like, wow, definitely shots fired. And we know now beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's going to be, anything can happen in this world. It's not going to be a sentimental journey by any means.
How about you, Dustin? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I felt like, Colin, I liked what you said about seeing some of the more intimate moments, particularly when they're in the under part of the city, where you can kind of see where there was once other survivors that were much like Joel and Ellie, just trying to, I guess they're not traveling like Joel and Ellie, but just trying to get by in the weird locations that aren't meant to be a home or a school or something like that. I also really found the overall story with Kathleen and the Resistance to be really cool. Very like Animal Farm-esque, where there's this idea of that Kathleen's brother initially led the Resistance, but he was never very effective because he just wasn't brutal or evil enough, I guess, to make things happen. And then you have Kathleen coming along, who's able to make things happen, but at a terrible cost. And then it's interesting, there's the part at the beginning, I rewatched the beginning of the episode before we started recording, where she's talking to the other people that snitched to FEDRA. And it almost seems like there's some hope for them, like, oh, you'll get a trial, but you'll be guilty. And then she just kills them all anyway. So it's this very much the new boss is same as the old boss situation that, of course, ends in a very, very bad situation at the end of the episode.
Indeed. Micah, give us your thoughts before we get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, this episode had it all for me. There was a lot of tension. The action sequences were fantastic. I can't get over the effects that they're using, and I'm just so happy to see the use of practical effects. Like they're really outstanding. I'm just thrilled with this episode. We had tension, sadness, action. It had everything I wanted. This is an episode that I was really anticipating. Having played the game multiple times, I wondered, will it still hit me? Will it still be impactful? And it certainly was, and largely in part to some of the changes they made from the game. And I was thrilled with them. Like, this was an episode, much like Billstown, this was an episode I was a little nervous to see because it's a section of the game that I really enjoy, and that means a lot to me. I think they did like a fantastic job with it.
Yeah, well said. I think for me, I agree with you. I think this episode was high caliber, plays around a lot with the lore and the in-between spaces that we don't get to see. I think in some way, and we'll get into it later, I think that this episode more than the others actually begins to reveal some of the Achilles heels or weaknesses, I would say, of the show. Like specifically because there's no gameplay, we don't really get exposition or time with Joel and Ellie to develop. We just kind of have to believe that they're getting closer and closer and closer, but we don't really see it. And in fact, at this point in the game, they become closer, but it's not really until the winter period that they become like they almost are now, when Joel gets hurt and so on and so forth. So I don't know. There's a little bit of a weakness exposed here too. It's not really a weakness. It's just kind of a more negative part of the show, I think, is just Joel and Ellie not getting enough of them. The show seems very focused on telling the stories of others as well, which is great. That kind of vibes with me because it gets more into the lore versus character combination we were talking about earlier, and how I'm really more of a lore guy. But the necessary kind of nature of The Last of Us and the dark brutality of it, and kind of the passing through nature of their journey to Wyoming, it means that we don't get to see many of these characters very often, or that they necessarily have to die or be left behind. And so it was a bummer for me to see a character like Kathleen die, even though you knew it was going to happen, because it's such an interesting character. And by the way, I just have to say, there were just generally, I saw, not in our community per se, but just out there, like people being like, what the fuck is this Kathleen character or whatever? And I'm like, I don't understand how you guys didn't understand that character, like, and how awesome
it's
that
strange.
character is. Like, what don't you understand about? Everyone's like, it's like a meek PTA mom or whatever. I'm like, yes,
exactly.
That's right. You know, it's awesome. It's fucking dark and brutal, and her just almost mousiness, the way she talks, and it's definitely diabolical and very well done. And I was really happy to see someone had insulted the character. I don't know if you guys saw this on Twitter or something like that, and she responded and was
Oh,
like, dude, and she's like, my character literally engineers the overthrow of FEDRA. Like, you have no idea what you're talking
well
about,
played,
basically.
Melanie
And
Linsky.
I loved seeing that, though she was spoiling it a little bit because she said that before we even saw this
that's
episode.
not good.
But I don't think they have any clue like when these things actually air. She's like, I filmed this 2 years ago or something like that.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Cease and desist, Melanie Linsky.
But I think it was a very well done episode, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think we get to where we need to get, and I like how it challenges us with some of the characters and the moral ambiguity of all things in this world. So I think it does a nice job of that and continues this kind of excellent track through the first season. But let's get into these the specifics first. Dig, you kind of get your wish a little bit with a cold open, although it's not really very far back. But they kind of go back only 10 days. I guess we're learning, and this is, I guess, an interesting thing. And I was surprised that the overthrow of the QZ is very recent. Joel and Ellie are encountering this when this basically just happened. And I wonder in which direction you want to take it from here and what you think about this kind of opening sequence. One of the things that I walked away from just as a as a lore guy is FEDRA going to do anything about it? I mean, it just seems like they're not even worried about retaliation. Like they're just they destroyed these dudes and just took over and never say a word about like or any sort of retaliation from HQ or something like that. So I loved kind of the dark, dire final feeling about it. But there's a lot to say about the section, and I want you to kick it off.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's a great point that I didn't think of yet. Like when FEDRA loses a city, when they lose an installation, do they just chalk it up to defeat? Just kind of, scrape that one off the chalkboard, off the dry erase board, and just say, well, we lost that one, but we still have another 22, whatever. Or will they come back and try to implement, rule again? I mean, I love setting it off this way because it confirmed everything that we've been hearing about in dribs and drabs leading up to this episode, that FEDRA was ruling Kansas City and we could gather most of the cities across the continent with kind of like this totalitarian rule, right? Like they were extremely brutal. They were raping, they were pillaging, they were murdering, they were turning neighbor against neighbor. It was just like an insidious governing that, sort of transcends anything we've ever heard of in communist real life, And so we understand this resistance, this uprising of people that just sort of rose up and overthrew this regime and took over. And I love the way the Kathleen character plays into that with her now lost brother, Michael. But I love kind of seeing that because basically what happened, what was already implied earlier, and now we know, is that Kathleen's, this suburban minivan driving housewife turned dark, her now resistance government that's in place is just as brutal as what they just got rid of, right? It's the same. It's basically the same thing under a different name. And her sort of, it really just plays into what I love to see with this, which is a world inhabited by characters that are just all seemingly drenched in gray, right? Like a world painted with that massive gray brush. Everybody has a story. There are no stereotypical good guys or bad guys. And I think that's probably what people are responding to with the Kathleen character. People aren't used to that. They want, the bad guy to be wearing black and they want the good guy to be wearing white, and a bad guy should look like a villain and a good guy should look like a hero. And that's not this world, but that's really wonderful world building, is that, this Kathleen person looks like a tame suburban PTO president, in your local elementary school, but she was driven to vengeance by the loss of her beloved brother, who was the resistance leader. The other super interesting thing that I love here is that one of the real heroes of this story and this character, Michael, and everything we hear about, we'll never get to meet. He was probably one of the real heroes in this entire overarching thing of what's happening on the planet. And he has a really bad, this Christ-like figure. And he has this really terrible ending. And not only the irony in that of like the real heroes, even beyond our actual protagonists, like this guy seemed like a seriously good, noble-hearted, kind, generous, selfless leader. But this world just isn't built for that. This world, those type of people aren't going to survive in this world. That's what the people are telling us. That's what the story is telling us. And if you have Kathleen and her brother, it's the Kathleens, not the Michaels, that are going to survive. So I love the way the characters sort of just spring out of all these events with FEDRA, with the overthrow, with this brutal resistance movement. And of course, when we meet Henry and Sam as also an extension of that story, and how people sort of operate based on their own needs and their own, familial requirements, and that, what happened in the world based on this fungal outbreak, and then people responding to that, and then the people responding to that domino effect, just creating this catastrophic thing that even goes beyond the actual infection, of just how people are responding to it, and how that's really kind of what's destroying the world.
What do you think, Dustin? What about this intro in the QZ of Kansas City?
Yeah, I think that, apart from the stuff that I said earlier and what Dagan said earlier, I think the thing that really stuck out to me overall is just this idea that Kathleen, as I said, was ferocious, and she was able to lead the downfall of FEDRA, which is impressive, right? But once that was accomplished, it's interesting how her motivations were very, very quickly on finding one particular person. And it's interesting that she gets some pushback on this, where they're probably, gone by now. I'm trying to remember exactly, but she's like, what do you think? This is my 7th priority. And it's, as if you've played more into, or if you've know the whole story, if you've played the second game, this is kind of like the first instance we see of this idea of like revenge above all. This is the thing that matters the most. And it's interesting to see just how her crew is willing to follow her despite knowing that what they're doing is not efficient, and it is potentially very dangerous, and ultimately what it costs them at the end of the episode.
Yeah, well said. And just the foreshadowing, obviously, in the previous episode, of there being something going on with this underground sort of cordyceps growth that the show kind of frames itself around, as opposed to the game. What do you think about this opening sequence, Micah? What do you make of Kathleen and the overthrow of FEDRA, and the character Perry, which is her, and yes, you guys all wrote in, this is Tommy from the original game, the voice actor. Really like his look, and again, he looks to me like a Call of Duty character, so it's funny. And I actually think he's been in some of the Call of Duty games. But anyway, what do you think of this intro sequence?
Yeah, the very first, scenes where they're showing the celebration at the overthrow of FEDRA, and, people are shooting off flares and everything. And then you see them start, murdering the FEDRA agents. And it was really brutal. At one point they're, dragging, a body across the road, and it's full of knives that have been stabbed into him. This is horrendously brutal, the way that they have attacked these people. And at first you have to question, did they really deserve that? It's you find out a little bit later how awful FEDRA was in that specific QZ, but that very intro just shows you these people really had an axe to grind. They didn't just take over the city and shoot these guys. They absolutely tormented these people. And then moving into the interrogation sequence, Kathleen trying to get the information out of the collaborators that they rounded up. I really, though, that first shot of the celebration and the brutality they were showing, that set the tone for the episode for me, of exactly how afraid Joel and Ellie should be of getting caught by these people, because they don't even know who Joel and Ellie are. They just know these are our enemies, and that is what they do to their enemies. So the feeling they've truly walked into a hornet's nest that they had no comprehension of when they arrived, of what just happened here so very recently. And as you said, Colin, it's only a very brief flashback. It's only 10 days prior. It does set up questions as to yeah, they seem to be totally unaware of or, unconcerned with any idea of FEDRA coming back. I would have liked a little more of that, but I also like the mysteries that they leave us. I think I don't want all my questions answered. I want some of this to be left to my own imagination as to, just to ruminate on later. But that first sequence really got me like, wow, these people are fucking nuts.
It's interesting because I really like how the show also exposes, because you're talking about like kind of the order of FEDRA and leaving or whatever, that they have this control over this entire city. And I'm looking at the population now. I just looked it up. The population of Kansas City, congratulations for your Super Bowl win, by the way, more than 500,000 right now. And so it's this underlining illustration, this insinuation that like everyone's dead. Like everyone's dead. Like, where is everybody? There's like entire cities just with hundreds of people, it seems like, in them. And I loved those, especially we see them later, but when they're in the skyscraper or the taller building, and there's like these eerie shots of the city just totally still, where there's like one truck driving in the background or whatever. And I'm like, this is a bustling American metropolis. And it just suggests how brutal everyone had to have been to have even gotten this far, or how canny or clever they needed to be, which is really what we see more with Henry. But yeah, I'm glad that, Micah, that you also brought up the brutality, because the violence is very telling. It's reminiscent in a much more extreme way of the beginning of the game, when if you take your time walking through the streets of Boston, you see like dudes get executed and people fucking rounded up and arrested and all sorts of things if you let it play out. And yeah, this is total retaliation, and it makes you wonder like what. There is a quote, actually, I don't know if it's Perry or Kathleen, saying like they raped and murdered people for 20 years. And it's like, okay, so, and they're asking the people, obviously, and prodding them, like, you did this for like apples, you did this for booze. And I can understand. It's almost like, what do you even have to lose at that point? Like, what are you even living for? It brings up all these philosophical questions as well, not only with the mass of humanity basically extinguished, but also like, what are you even doing? And why are you doing this? And is it better to just be dead anyway, as opposed to have to live like animals? Speaking of living like animals, I wanted to talk to you guys about the kind of the scene in the attic. We see the attic in the previous episode. Joel and Ellie encounter it full of empty cans of food, and they move on. And so this insinuates something had happened here. And what we find out happens here is that Henry and Sam, Henry being a collaborator and Sam being his 8-year-old ward brother, deaf, which is important, have been trying to get out of the city, as who the hell knows what will happen to Sam if Henry is captured. And so they're living off of these canned goods that were given to them. And obviously this hiding spot, it almost has this like World War II sort of vibe of hiding in quiet and just being as discreet as you can be. And this is done by another collaborator that I guess Kathleen thinks is more discreet, which I thought was funny. But there's a lot of interesting things and threads to pull here. Michael, let's stay with you, and we'll go in a reverse direction this time. What did you think of this scene? You know me with cozy spaces and hiding out. It's like a thing for me. I love it. I just love the idea of hiding away and staying quiet and being kind of stealthy and surviving and moving on. So this part spoke to me, but I was also interested in a few other things, including like the use of sign language, and which suggests that there's some sort of apparatus that can even teach that sort of thing to people, you would assume. And also the idea of, continuing to eat this ancient canned food that people seem to have just stockpiles of. And I don't know, there's a lot of interesting stuff here. So take it away in whatever direction you'd like.
Yeah, at the start of this scene, just seeing how young Sam truly was, I just immediately knew this episode's going to be so hard to get through, because they do make him younger than he is in the game. And that just really pulled at my heartstrings. I'm not even someone who really likes kids that much. But of course, you can't look at a kid like that and be like, oh, I don't care what happens to them. Like, it just immediately, I knew that this episode was going to be hard to watch. In the previous one, where we saw their hiding place and we saw all the pictures that Sam had drawn, and seeing the cans, how long they'd been holed up in there, that was a really eerie feeling, like a sinking feeling, like seeing that a child was living this way. And then seeing it in this episode from the beginning, the sort of heartfelt moment where Henry encourages Sam to decorate. he's trying to show Sam he's not afraid, and he encourages him to start, using his crayons and coloring. It is a real reminder of we don't see many children in this world, and that they are still children, that they're still just absolutely, they need distractions. They cannot get through this the way an adult can. We see Sam also throw like a little bit of like a tantrum. And that was important to me because it shows like kids are not perfect just because they're put in these situations. They're not going to be perfectly behaved. Like Sam, knowing that he's deaf, will ask Henry sometimes, "Do you hear anything?" But then Sam will do things like make noise to throw a tantrum, which is very dangerous. So I enjoyed this sequence of seeing them and seeing how Henry, tried to reassure Sam. He's trying his best to keep them safe. And Sam still has the tendencies of a young child to be, a little bit unruly. And certainly the stress of the situation would be getting to him. But I did notice, like at the end of the previous one, I had thought, I was like, what, does the kid have like face paint on? What is that? And I was like, oh, I think he's supposed to be Super Sam. And seeing that moment in the attic scene was really cute. I couldn't believe how much this episode was getting to me because I've already experienced the game so many times, and the changes that they made here were perfect for getting me still engaged, emotionally with these characters that I feel like I already knew their fate. And suddenly I was like, oh, this puts a whole new spin on it. And as you mentioned with the sign language, it's very cool that they did have, I obviously don't know if they're doing like legit, ASL, or if they've just developed their own method of speaking together. And I think that's another neat kind of thread to pull of, I wonder what resources they did have. They're in a QZ, so what did they have for schooling? What did they have for, was he born deaf? It gives me a lot of questions to think about. And I do like the idea that maybe they did just develop this on their own even and figured out a way to communicate just to get through the day. His little tablet that he writes on too was just so cute. I had one of those, like, I don't know, flippy writing things. And I loved that when I was a kid. So this scene was awesome for me and had just so much to enjoy.
Yeah, that noise I think used to bother me, like the peeling noise. Like I can't have that. I can't have that around me. Yeah, it's a lot of interesting points you make, and I do like the sign language aspect of it. I think some people look at it as being, inclusive of disability in the show, which is cool and all of that, but I just think it feels real. And I like that. And I especially like how it really introduces this idea of collaboration and this idea that maybe this isn't even the best person, but doing very similar to Joel, who we know better and have more sympathy with. We can sympathize with this idea of just basically doing what you need to do to survive. Although I think it brings up in my own mind what the point is of surviving at some point if you have to live like this, But dying is obviously very difficult and scary, and you wouldn't want to do that either. Dustin, what do you think about this attic scene? And talk to me.
Well, this part is, I think, in hindsight, looking at the episode, really interesting in that they were really building up this idea that Henry and Sam, while they are wanted, it feels like they want to try to direct you to feel like they really didn't do anything to deserve this. Particularly in that the people that we saw got executed earlier were mostly there for ratting people for food or booze, as you said, or something. And so you think that maybe they stole some food or did something, mildly bad just to survive. And so now they're wanted because clearly, I mean, look at how good of a guy Henry is. Look at how well he's taking care of Sam. Sam is, he's deaf. He can't hear anything. How could these two possibly be enemy number one? And so the way it sets up that you really feel, the way that sets it up for you to feel bad for them, I thought was really interesting, particularly portrayed in this scene. And then, of course, that all gets flipped on its head later in the episode, which we can talk about in a bit. The other thing to touch on, and I'm glad you mentioned this, Colin, is that the idea of the canned foods. Let's talk about this for a second. If I was in this situation, let me tell you, I'm so thankful that I've never actually been hungry in my entire life, because the thought of eating nothing but, 7 cans, like green beans and like some mysterious meat or something like that. I'm like, man, this sounds truly awful. Like, if
From
you think
20
about
years ago.
yeah, and it's 20 years old. And you have to imagine there's times too where it's like, oh, okay, this is a can of dog food. Like, this is what we got, but you can eat it and it will help you survive. Like, man,
I'm sure.
it's something that when we play these games or watch these shows, you just kind of passing like, oh yeah, they're just eating whatever they can to survive. But think about it. Think about you hiding in an attic, opening up a can of pork and beans from 25 years ago or something like that, and then just eating it cold. Like, it sounds truly horrible. But I mean, like I said, I'm thankful I've never actually been hungry before in my life. Like, I've never been in a situation where I'm like, oh, that actually would. I'm sure for them it probably was pretty good, which is
totally. It's
crazy
just
context.
It's just scary because everything seems. I always think about this in these situations, like the finality of everything around them. Like, there is no. They do insinuate that there is some manufacturing going on. It seems like they manufacture meds, weapons, things like that. But generally, they probably do manufacture clothes and all sorts of things. It's different places, but there's like a finality suggested in that they keep in the first episode or the second episode, you find out that they keep their plastic bags, like their Ziploc bags. And actually, there's a cool shot when he's pulling everything out of his backpack. I think he has like a Tupperware, like an ancient Tupperware full of whatever, crayons or whatever it was. And I was just like, it's funny that you have to kind of find things and hold them and maintain them right on down to your shoes and your pants and all these things. It's like you said, you've never been hungry. Like, you've never, I mean, either you've never worried about where things actually come from and how catastrophic it was when they were, ambushed in Kansas City and lost like all their shit, and it's like, that's deadly, literally deadly for a situation for them to be in. And I don't know, I think they do a really nice job of focusing in on it. I think even more than the game, especially because they have more space to just kind of explore with establishing shots and suggestions to the audience about what's going on that are simply not possible in a linear third-person video game. Dave, talk to me about this attic scene, however you like.
I love seeing this world through another set of eyes, another perspective from a duo with their own kind of set of circumstances, their own relationship, they're tasked with their own challenges. My heart really goes out to Henry and Sam because, first of all, what I realize is like this story is really telling us that a lot of these characters are kind of keyed into surviving for a loved one. It's a world of like duos, right? We have Joel and Ellie, and it used to be Joel and Sarah, and it used to be Joel and Tess. We had Frank and Bill. We have Kathleen and Michael. And now we have Henry and Sam, and it seems like everybody's kind of keyed into just surviving for that specific loved one. That's what everything hinges on. And for these two, I feel so bad for them because, they have to stay one step ahead of the infected. They have no food. They're halfway starving. They have no ammo. They're on the run from this murderous militia. But then with little Sam's handicap, it's just another obstacle or impediment for these brothers just trying to stay alive and trying to survive to deal with. You could just think that Sam being deaf just adds another dimension and another kind of a hardship in a way. And then, we find out about the Sam character going forward too, makes it even more tragic. But I just kind of love that. And I love the Sam and Henry character. It becomes kind of a bottle episode for these two because we never really, spoilers, we never really get to know them beyond this. But it brings out the sort of evolution of both Joel and Ellie's personalities too. Via Sam and Henry, we get to see Ellie's kindness, and we get to see Joel's, one by one, that layer of ice is thawing from Joel. And we get to see, at first he's angry and then judgmental, and then we see kind of his acceptance set in and that realization that I'm not going to judge you, Henry, because I don't know what your circumstances were for you to make the decisions that you made. And then eventually, of course, we find out. But I love that, it's bringing out, we're not seeing, like you said earlier, Kyle, we're not necessarily seeing the rapid evolution of Joel and Ellie's sort of relationship with each other, but we're seeing them evolve individually in proxy to these other characters that they meet along the way. And I love that the characters like Henry and Sam sort of serve as a vehicle for that, where we see our hero we get a little bit more dimension into our two protagonists through these two. And I think that was like one of the primary functions of this story and these two characters. And I gotta say, man, I hate that it ended so tragically for these two. I would have loved to see them stay alive a little longer, but we'll get there. Getting ahead of ourselves here.
Yeah, I was wondering if they were going to change the chemistry from the original game, such like with the various component parts, such that were they going to survive longer? Or was one of them going to survive and stay with them for a while? And I was like, I hope not. That I hate to say that I wanted them to die, but I think the show exposes like we're not getting enough Joel and Ellie, and all this other stuff is awesome, and I love it, and I'm not really complaining. Like I love it. It's just I'm glad that they didn't decide to mess with that too much, because we need more of Joel and Ellie, and I think that's the one thing the show's missing. This is a weird thing, but just aesthetically, I wanted to say shout out to the color orange and that orange paint they use. I am just so attracted to that color. I think it's such a beautiful color, vibrant, almost unnatural, but at the same time very naturalistic. But you see, orange is similar to blue. Micah and I have talked about this, but it's even more rare, I think, than blue, where it's like you don't really see it in nature, and when you do, like a flower is this beautiful orange, you notice it and it grabs your eye. I've just always been very attracted to that color. And so seeing him like use, who knows how old that fucking paint is, when he's seeing him just paint with it, I was like, I like that color orange. It makes everything pop.
It pops,
especially in that brown surrounding in that ill-lit attic. I was interested though, because he seems so flippant, like looking outside, like taking their things off and putting them back on the window.
Dude, be careful.
I'm like, how did they not know? Like, I don't think Anne Frank was like standing in Visage in the fucking window like that.
I hope
while
not.
They were hiding from the Nazis. Like, I think that they were. And the other thing is that I understand that they do the banging thing to talk to each other, but I'd be like, even when they were doing it in the skyscraper or the taller building, I was like, be quiet. I don't know. Yeah, maybe chill out a little bit.
I hear that.
Okay. One other thing I wanted to say is I just loved the shot and the suggestion of what the shot means of Henry pulling out his knife and showing Sam his reflection in it or whatever. And that seems like a thing they've done a million times and they understand it, but it's so dark. Yeah, like him just taking out the knife and flipping it over and showing it.
Good shit.
Whatever. So I thought that was a nice piece of symbolism. All right, so the next stuff we see is kind of a unison of what we see last episode, and then this through Sam and Henry's perspective. And Joel and Ellie crash. They're ambushed, as we see by that character Brian, puts on that great performance as we discussed on the last episode. And I like this. This is something that I think was brought up earlier by Dustin, which is the idea that he can't hear. So Sam can't hear, and the performer puts on a great performance when there's gunfire and explosions outside right when they're trying to leave the attic, and he has this real look of fear, and he looks towards Henry for an immediate sort of response and reaction, like, what is going on? Communicate to me what is happening. You look horrified and scared. I really think that plays through really well, and ultimately we find out how these two groups come together. We see, of course, at the end of the last episode that they do indeed come together, but this is where kind of the timelines interact, and then we move forward from there. So Dustin, is there anything you want to add about this section as we, I guess, move towards the group of four's escape or attempted escape from Kansas City?
Well, I think that the meeting between the two of them actually adds to the point that I was making earlier, now that I think about it, where it's clear that they don't normally point their guns at people and demand things or whatever, but it adds to this idea like, oh, they aren't bad guys. Why are they the ones being hunted? Because clearly they could have killed Joel and Ellie and taken all their stuff. But in reality, they actually are. It was just like a precaution to make sure that they didn't kill them, and then in hopes that they could collaborate together in order to escape. And then I think the only other thing worth pointing on is just seeing how Ellie and Sam are able to instantly kind of become friends. And initially when I was thinking about this part, because I was like, man, Ellie's a lot older than Sam, but it seems like they connect really easily. And I guess from Ellie's perspective, what I was thinking is just that she is constantly around like gruff, worn down people that don't trust anybody, that don't want to have any fun ever. And I guess that kind of makes sense from Joel's position and what he's been through and stuff like that. And so for Ellie to finally be able to interact with someone who, yeah, maybe they've seen some shit and they're a kid, but they still have some of that childlike energy. And even though there is an age difference, they're able to very quickly get along. I thought was really interesting.
Dig, what did you make of them coming together?
I love these two groups coming together because, again, it spells out all four distinct personalities, you know. And yeah, I think Dustin makes a good point. It brings out Ellie's kindness, but it also brings out her childishness. She's a kid. She's been through the ringer. You know what I mean? She's seen a lot. There's got to be a lot of trauma involved and a lot of post-traumatic stress and everything. But yeah, she gets an opportunity to kind of be a kid via Sam again and play with him and not only comfort him, but it probably also comforts herself as well. And I love the differences between, you know, Henry and Sam are kind of like the echo of Joel and Ellie, but I love the differences between Henry and Joel. They're survivors, but by different means. Henry, we know, kind of survived by his wits, by his resourcefulness, by being clever, but also by his betrayals, which he feels terrible for. And of course, fueled by a love and a concern for his little brother. I got to say, I would have done the exact same thing if I was in Henry's position. And it does kind of invoke that human darkness of mine are more important than yours. But we all kind of do inherently feel that way. And again, that's that gray area. And I love that Henry sort of needs Joel too. Henry's not a fighter. You know, he's not a man of brawn. He's not a man of action. Henry knows his way around this area. This is his home. He knows the ins and outs. He has an escape plan, but he needs a warrior. He can't do it without Joel. So there's some sort of symbiotic thing going on here too. And the interesting thing about Joel is, you know, he's talk about somebody who's been through it. I mean, somebody who's cynical, who's, you know, just completely nihilistic, doesn't trust anybody. So he has that defensive wall up because he's so afraid of being hurt again. If you think about it, he really doesn't need Henry like Henry needs him. But again, that thawing layer off Joel where he's saying, okay, you know, you could come along with us and I'll protect you. It's sort of maybe one of Joel's first acts of kindness. There's definitely a kinder, gentler Joel in this episode in his interactions with Henry and Sam, in sort of giving in and saying, okay, we could take some downtime in this underground nursery school daycare center. Later on, his moments with the sniper where he's kind of begging the guy, like, stand down. You know, I don't want to kill you. So we're seeing a different side of Joel. Joel's humanity is coming back. It took a long time. It took decades. But I love that we're seeing a little bit of that with him too. And then, of course, poor Sam, like, you know, we find out this kid, you know, obviously this kid's deaf. He's surviving in this harsh world. He's only 8 years old. We find out he had leukemia. Maybe he's on the mend. Maybe he's not. That's kind of ambiguous. And then the way it ends for this character in the episode, it's just relentless. You know, it's like, oh my God, this is not going to be a show for happy endings. And it makes sense. This is not a world for happy endings. This is the brutality of this, you know, required in this world. And the balance is sort of tipped in the favor of people willing to embrace their darkness. It's not really for the fair. It's not for the just. It's maybe for the people willing to abandon their humanity. And that's what worries me about Joel, because he's our hero. We're rooting for him, but he's starting to quote unquote soften. And now it's like, maybe with that, the guard is getting let down a little bit. And how can he protect Ellie? We're rooting for that humanity, but at the same time, it's like, yo, be careful. Like, you know, maybe this isn't the world for that.
Yeah. And definitely well said. It's like, it's not, you didn't survive by being this way, but you're being softened by the person you're with, which I think is very interesting. Exactly what happens in the game as well. And I do like, you know, Micah, we can go on to you and talk to you about this. Is I feel like It's interesting that they still get to hit the various beats of the Sam Henry arc from the game while kind of changing things around and getting a little more intimate and personal with it. For instance, the betrayal and like kind of the multi-level lying to Joel. And I imagine in my mind as we were watching it last night, I was like, what would have Joel done to this dude if he encountered him just a few weeks before this? I mean, he says to him at some point, and I have it here in my notes, I don't work with rats. There seems to be some sort of understood nomenclature and some kind of rules of the game and what side you want to be on and what you accept as the way to play. And I find that just, if anyone is lucky, it's kind of Henry being lucky that he didn't encounter Joel at almost any other period, except for this one, because he probably would have killed him the first time he found out he lied to him. In fact, it's funny because at some point Ellie kind of says, like, when they're being, I think, kind of held at gunpoint, Joel is kind of obviously lying, about his status. Like, how is that? Are you all right? Yeah. And Ellie's kind of making fun of him, trying to just disarm himself a little bit. And so I just find that kind of an interesting point, an interesting thread to pull, is just how lucky he was. Yeah, Micah.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. Yeah. That scene with Henry having them at gunpoint, as Dustin had mentioned, it really does paint us a picture that Henry is not much of a fighter, to give us a little more sympathy of them, because we don't, Joel and Ellie don't know that gun's not loaded. And Henry, in that moment, his real weapon is his confidence. Like, his real weapon is the fact that, like, he has these people surprised and he falters. His voice falters when he's speaking. And while he has these people at gunpoint, Joel just speaking intimidates Henry to the point that he's panicking, like visibly panicking. And so it really just shows us that, like, even in a moment where he has the upper hand, in a moment where these people that he has, encountered are like, okay, like, we're at gunpoint, and he still is intimidated by them. So I liked that aspect of it, because it really gave us that notion that you look at Henry, and like in, this whole episode, Henry seems, he's tall, he's, physically fit. You don't know at this point, like, what he's capable of, but we see in this moment that he's not as he seems. He is certainly someone who's more meek than he appears. And even in this moment where he should be, in control of the situation, he's like losing ground to a man that he's holding at gunpoint. Like, that really just said a lot about Henry as a person. And that, as Dagan had said, like, this is someone who survived, like, by their wits and not through, like, brawn. It is also good to know that Dagan will sell us down the river for some canned goods, though. So I'm glad we had this discussion to know that he'll sell us out for a can of
just
bread
for
at
cancer,
some point during the apocalypse.
Maybe, like, canned peaches are delicious, but cancer medicine for sure.
Yeah, I totally understand it as well.
Yeah.
Well, they ultimately hatch their plan, and the plan is that they're going to use maintenance tunnels underneath Kansas City. I don't know if this is true or not. I imagine it probably is, that like these were basically tunnels under Kansas City that were built by the city's developer, basically, which is an interesting thing. I didn't know, and I imagine that that's got to be true, but I didn't look. And they want to kind of end up on the outside in kind of the exurbs of the city so they can kind of skedaddle and continue west. And that's the plan they hatch, and they decide to go together. In going together alone, it's another softening of Joel's stances. I don't think he would have ever traveled with someone he didn't know. It seemed like he was all about kind of a code of ethics and very specific people and pipelines and relationships that he had developed over time. We see that when they meet Frank and Bill a few episodes ago as well. But I wanted to reiterate that it's, I think at this point too, that and I just wanted to touch on this, that, and you guys don't have to speak to it if you don't want to, but I just feel like that this episode really does outline what's missing. And I think a lot of people think that what's missing from the show so far, or at least what I hear, is that people feel like combat is missing or action. But I don't think it's that at all. When you think about The Last of Us, actually, it's almost no action. There are set pieces and moments of real kinetic movement and action, and some of these moments like the hotel scene last, and it's awesome shit. They can last 15, 20 minutes, a half an hour, depending on how you're slinking around. It's good stuff, but that's not really what the game's about. So I don't feel like the game is missing so much of that. And I think that they actually, through some of the camera angles, they encapsulate some of those over the shoulder views and kind of them hiding behind things and showing the camera like that. I think they've done a really nice job of reiterating and showing kind of a gameplay perspective. I do believe that what's missing from those rather is what I mentioned earlier, which was this lack of exposition and lack of natural just being with each other for hours and hours. We don't get that. And so I feel like we're getting to a point with Joel and Ellie's familiarity with each other. Like when they get into, I specifically wrote this because when they get into the tunnels for the first time and they understand that there might be some clickers around or whatever, he's like, pull out your gun. And it's like, it seems like 2 minutes ago you were fucking shocked that she had this thing at all. And now and certainly you've had conversations and experiences since then, but we didn't get any of that. And so I feel like it's just, we're kind of being exposed to Joel and Ellie's relationship as like point A, point B, point C, point D, point E. And it's like, okay, I get it. I mean, that's fine. And that's the way a lot of things are presented in stories. But we get like A.1, A.2, A.3, B.1, B.2, B.3 in the story of the game just by existing and playing a video game.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing that's going to be hard for anything to replicate because you're not playing it. And no one's going to be like, each of these episodes needs to be 3 hours long because Ellie needs to tell jokes from her book or whatever. And they get to those things, but that's actually over time that joke develops. Joel ignores her at first completely, and over time is like annoyed by it. Then over time finds it funny. It takes hours for you to get that, but they kind of just shove all of that into one episode. And so I just wanted to point that out here. I don't know if you guys agree, but any of you want to speak on that before we move on?
Yeah, no, I think that makes
ahead,
sense. Well, no, I'm just going to real quick to say that I agree. I mean, that's something that, I don't know, it's the show being 9 episodes long, I guess, which it varies, but it will say it's about an hour. So 9 hours long. I mean, it just, in some ways it doesn't feel quite long enough, but at the same time, because you have that marriage of like gameplay where even if you're not doing something interesting, you're still interacting. Like you said, you can't necessarily do that on a show the same way. So it is a bit of a catch-22. But Dagan, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with what you guys are saying. Like in the game, you have to stay with the protagonist too. So the discipline is you can't really veer off. You can't do the cold opening. You can't do the side story. I mean, you can in cutscenes, but for the most part, the momentum of the game requires that staying with the protagonist, staying with the action. It's a game, staying with the set pieces and all that. Now in the TV show in episodic form, even in film form, you let it breathe. I'm such a mark for story and character, and it's done so compellingly here. And then I think there's also a lot of tension. There's horror elements, and I think there's enough action peppered in. You get the human on human action. You get the human on infected action. I think there's a nice balance of, you get a little everything, whatever your pleasure is, you get a little bit, you get a flavor of it all. And I think it's enough. And I think it's enough. I think it's being done really, really well. I also feel like there's a nice rhythm to it. When we feel like, we haven't seen infected in a while, then there's an answer for that. If we see like, what are the hunters doing? What are these vigilante groups doing? We get a taste of that. The one thing I'll say that they've left on the fence for a while that I think they'll be returning to with episode 6, actually, if just watching the coming attractions, is the Fireflies. They haven't touched on that really since the first episode. So it's time, definitely overtime to return to that. But it's also important to be aware we're over halfway in now. We have only 4 episodes left, at least for the first season. So they do have to do a lot with 4 more hours. And I'm interested to see how they're going to do it. But I trust our creators at this point. These 2 guys, I think they're just doing God's work. And for me, I could see people saying that. They want that level of action. They want that level of intensity. But I have to say, even thinking back to other iconic zombie things like The Walking Dead, even Attack on Titan, that goes long periods of time where there's a buildup. You know what I mean? Then there has to be a release. It can't just be the nonstop action is for something else. It's not really appropriate for The Last of Us, I feel like.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I think that you're right that they're doing a lot of really orchestral sort of balancing of all the different elements of The Last of Us and this world without being overbearing, staying on anything too long. Again, the only thing that's minimized is the inherent relationship at the center of The Last of Us, but it could be that the HBO run will be much less about Joel and Ellie than the game was. I mean, that's possible. So far it is a lot less about them than the game. I mean, demonstrably so. So anything's possible here. And so I wanted to touch next on this, and Micah, will go to you, which is we see Ish's hideout. And this is a really cool ode to the game and something that a lot of people will just think is maybe an incidental part of it, but it's not. This is a key part of the game and mixes a location that we see and visit in the game, which is this underground labyrinth of rooms and corridors where people were surviving early in the outbreak, and stuff that we don't see, and I don't know if we ever will, which is like we learn about Ish first in the lead up to that as we find his boat, but we're learning everything in reverse in the game, and so we're learning everything backwards. So I don't know if that will be true here too. Maybe it will be, but I really liked seeing this, and I thought this was a cool place, to kind of cool things down, remind everyone that there was some sort of normalcy trying to be achieved, and that it was actually being achieved possibly for years. And I like how it's a seemingly throwaway line, but Joel says something along the lines of like, maybe they didn't follow the rules, but he wasn't being sarcastic. It was more of like something like this can break down very easily if not everyone is on board together, and really underlines the difficulty in surviving in this very aggressively hostile world. So what did you think about seeing Ish's hideout?
Yeah, that's extremely eerie. As soon as you see the children's drawings on the wall, the little classroom, first they just did such a great job bringing the game to life in that actual set, because it just looked so much like that area, and seeing like the rules written on the whiteboard and everything, like that was a very cool moment to see. This is maybe though my disappointment with the episode is I wanted more of that section, because in the game that's one of my favorite sections, and the real horror of that sequence is in the game is not the enemies that you encounter, it's the notes and everything you find that give you hints as to what happened here. And it's truly tragic to enter what's clearly a nursery school, a daycare like Dagan said, and why is it empty? That's a horrifying concept. Like, where did all the kids go? That's something that's explored in the game, and I won't say too much about that because I still don't know how sensitive people are about things like that. But it's just, the game is truly terrifying in that moment, not for who you encounter, but for the lore that you get through finding notes and records. And I wish that the show had given us more of that, because I mean, you can try and fill in the dots, yourself, but fill in the blanks. But it just is. It's like, no, this is terrifying that we have found a school and it's empty. And I wish they had really done more with that. But it was really cool to see like the drawing that said like our protectors, and it was Ish. That was a super cool for me moment that they did like do something faithful to the game that felt like it was a bit for us. I just wish it was more.
Yeah, definitely well said. One thing that bothered me too was just the amount of noise everyone was making in this section.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They're playing
With
soccer.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you guys? Like, calm down. For me, like, aren't you scared? Like, shouldn't you be a little more scared? Dustin, talk to me about Ish's hideout and how you felt about this quieter part of the episode.
Yeah, well, I don't have too much to say, because honestly, what I was thinking, I was like, I actually don't really remember this part very well from the game. And so I think to put a different angle on what Micah said, because I don't think Micah's wrong, but what if maybe in some ways they designed the show to have elements that if people do decide to go play the game, that they can kind of have the flip side experience of people who played the game that are then watching the show. Because for me, I was thinking about it. I was like, well, that seems interesting. And I remember a little bit, but not very much. So that's something that I'm looking forward to when I do replay the game, that I'll be like, oh, I remember this, how it was kind of like lightly talked about in the show, but then kind of moved on. So I don't know, maybe that was intentional, maybe it wasn't, but it would be a cool thing to do for those people that maybe are going to play the game for the first time afterwards.
Dave, do you have anything you want to add before we move to the next
That's
frame
a
here?
great point that I didn't think of. I mean, it kind of works in reverse, right? You could take these people tuning into HBO, which are the moral majority, right? And you could entice them to play the game through vague things like this, where you just give them a taste of it and say, if you want to learn more. And I noticed that Druckmann and Mazin are talking about this stuff in their follow-ups. And if not, then certainly on Troy's Last of Us podcast, they are going into all this stuff. And it is interesting. What I tell you, what I love about these type of things. Listen, Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin, they're tasked with this juggling act, with this magic, this magical thing of having to take this beloved video game and turn it into a TV show that works. And the fact that on top of everything that goes into that, they're taking the time and the effort to tie in these loving nods to the day oneers and the Last of Us OGs, like you guys, like Kyle, like that, they don't have to do that kind of stuff. And it feels like, yes, albeit with the fact of like maybe enticing people back to Naughty Dog and back to the game. And, who knows, maybe it gets more gamers. But I do think, and we talk about this a lot, I do think there's a lot of people who still think of video games as like Donkey Kong. Maybe 8-bit, 16-bit, but they stop paying attention at a certain point. I don't know that there's a lot of people that realize how deep the video game genre goes. So I love people getting turned on to gaming through this. But what I really love is these two guys, these showrunners, taking the time to weave this into the tapestry when it's already so complicated. And that's just a thoughtful nod to the source material and to gamers and to gaming, because that's why they had the opportunity to become multimillionaires doing this show, right? So they're kind of, you know what I mean? They're celebrating the source, you know what I mean? Where it comes from and what sort of enabled them to get this far in their careers and with this specific property. And I think that's really admirable, and it's something they don't have to do. It's classy.
Yeah, it is. Classier than barely acknowledging PlayStation Anywhere in the intro. I don't really care. I actually do care. I think it's a huge mistake in branding, but that's neither here nor there, because this is obviously a massive critical and commercial success for them. But all right, so we learn a little bit more as we go on. As Joel softens on Henry and Sam, he learns that this deception is due to something we mentioned earlier, which were the meds that they were getting for leukemia. And I was pretty amazed that leukemia could be cured in this in this environment. I mean, but this is, I think they kind of foreshadow this in some sense by making note that FEDRA pumps out meds apparently in some mysterious factories somewhere, maybe in the Northeast or in the middle of the country. And so they were, that Henry was working on this just to get these meds and funnel them towards his brother in his ward, which makes a lot of sense. And I like here that we learn that there's a perception from Henry that Sam is a father, or that Joel is a father. And I really loved that. And I thought that was a really nice punch to the scene, and kind of maybe giving him a little bit more credit for his perception and his ability to not only get the jump on Joel while he's sleeping and could have killed him easily, but then kind of perceives more about what he keeps near and dear and holds dark in this ancient time that seems so far away for him, which is the pre-pandemic era. So I dug that as well. I wanted to run this really by you really quick. I don't know if you guys would appreciate this. I mentioned it to Micah briefly, but Dig, I wonder what you think of this. We'll start with you. I was talking about how I love, actually, when they're in the tunnels, I saw a Bank of America ad, and I noted, I was like, even those motherfuckers know that it's cool to get involved in a show like this and like make yourself seen in things like this. And you know what I didn't see any of? And it wasn't just on my mind because of the Super Bowl or anything, but no Chiefs gear. And I was thinking like, you know what would be cool is maybe not in this show, maybe in another show, is if some NFL team or an NHL team or something allowed their logo to be used by like a militia or something in this. It's like Kansas City, they like basically raided the pro shop or whatever at the stadium and have all of this shit. And so they all wear like red hats or like Chiefs logos, like literal Chiefs logos. And they're like the Kansas City militia. And I was like, is that cool or is that corny? Because I think that would be kind of an awesome thing.
No, that's part of a city's iconography. They're sports teams, so that really would be I think that would feel really authentic and genuine, like a nice way to represent the city. I wonder, you have to kind of put your sports knowledge in here, Kyle. Let's say they were filming this a year or two ago. Were the Chiefs a contending team back then, or are they like new?
Oh yeah, definitely. They've been a contending team for the last 5 years or so. But even if it was just anyone, like they were in Jacksonville and it was the Jaguars, or they're on Long Island and it's the Islanders, like just a smart sports team being like, whoa, like you ever think about using our logo as like the resistance? And here's how it works. And here's why it would be cool. Like they just stole from the stadium, or their headquarters is a stadium, perhaps.
Yeah, the sports teams need that fashion forward thinking of like a Bank of America. Look, Bank of America is a multi-billion trillion-dollar company. They have the best brand marketing people. The best companies, the biggest companies have the best. So they're on the cutting edge. They know. Bank of America knows those branding, those in-house advertising people know. Like we should get our logo on the wall. Like sports teams need to get savvy. They need to get hip.
Yeah, I just thought that would be cool. Like the militia is called the Timberwolves, and they're in Minneapolis, and they wear Minneapolis Timberwolves shit, like just straight up. I think that would be. Isn't it Minneapolis Timberwolves? I think that's what it is. Minnesota Timberwolves,
sounds right?
Something like that. Not a basketball guy, really. All right, so I wanted to get into when they're found out, and I guess all of the drama that surrounds this. So first of all, I love I brought this up in the last episode, but the truck they have, the heavy truck that just says "run" on it, and it's plowing everything away. It's just so good. Joel taking the shots at it, keep missing, gets the headshot at the last minute as Ellie falls and would have just gotten completely obliterated. And so she's saved in that moment. But at this point, Kathleen asks Henry something that I thought was interesting, which is like, you think the whole world revolves around him? And it forced us, I think, as an audience and all of us as individuals to kind of ask ourselves, like, why? And it's what you said earlier, Dave, like, why are the individuals closest to us most important? But that's just kind of the way it is.
Human nature.
Right. It's just kind of the way it is. But she, of course, is speaking as someone who just lost her brother and is obviously also insane. What did you think about this confluence? And Michael, let's go to you first with this one. What did you think about the kind of the action at the end, the confluence of this truck crashing into a house? Seems kind of inconspicuous, but then the truck over the minute starts crumbling into the ground. There's a hollowed out. And I assume, I don't know, are we assuming that those are Ish's people that are coming out of the tunnels there? That was my assumption. I assumed that the kid that attacks Ellie is just one of the kids that was down there, but I don't know if that was like intended. But anyway, speak on it however you'd like.
This action sequence, as soon as it starts with the sniper, you and I had both said this feels like the game. I liked that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I did want to touch real quick on the sports aspect thing.
No, please.
In the first game, one of my favorite moments is you come across a hockey advertisement. And I just really liked that because obviously I'm a really big hockey fan. But I always wished, I was like, yeah, it would be really cool if these were real teams. And I do hope maybe, if they recreate that shot, because it's a very large advertisement. I tried to find it and it's too obscure. There's a very large advertisement of a hockey player in one of the places they go. And I would love for them to do that in the show and maybe make that a real team. That'd be awesome. But this sequence of action, starting with the sniper that's going after them, totally felt like the game in the way that they're taking cover and everything, and getting to see the infected, of course. I mean, as soon as they started pouring out of that crater, that was just such an electric moment. It's part of when you say the child, clicker, and maybe it's alluding to the fact that they came from, the Ish's hideout. And that's where it's a little bit of a discrepancy with the game and a little bit of something I take issue with. I like the scene. I think that it's cool that they went there because for the most part, we don't have children being infected. The show is, for a lot of it, not shown too much violence. This scene and the intro scene for this episode, very graphic. They really went for it with the bloater and everything, just annihilating people. So I felt like this was what I needed to give the show a bit more edge, because as much as I've been enjoying it, I am like an action junkie and I love that type of stuff. And not the Game of Thrones level of violence, mind you, but this was perfect for me. And seeing all those infected, just like rushing them, was incredible.
Yeah, this really underlines the differences between the game's infected and this HBO world's infected. Just totally different. The runners even in the game don't move nearly this fast, and they would be by far the fastest enemies that weren't human. And the humans will run after you and kind of try to collaborate with the others around you to kind of circle you in and stuff. But I don't know, the kinetic speed of all of it is so different, but I kind of dig it. And Dustin, I think you'll be able to appreciate this or not, this kind of inquiry. I don't know if you feel this. I'm like, it's like a little bit of a Days Gone vibe to the way that they handle the zombies here, because that game was all about these hordes of zombies that moved really fast and were like on you. And I was like, that's kind of like, shout out to maybe a little bit of Ben's studio here. Although I think that's kind of more of a trope in zombie fiction, generally speaking. But and speak on this however you like. I'd be curious to know how you feel about the kind of the change in the behavior, which we've seen in the other episodes, but it's obviously magnified here. There's no scene like this in either game.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was reminding me of like 28 Days Later, which I think, I don't know, is that the origin of the fast zombie? I think maybe.
Yeah. I don't know. I have no idea where I'm just not up on that at all.
Yeah. But I like this part, and I kind of like the change just in that you have all of these guys with assault rifles. You have like an armored vehicle, but as soon as that horde comes out, it's game over. Some of them may be able to run away, but even then it's pretty much over. And I think the part that stuck out to me the most is that Kathleen brought all of her men out here in this desperate final act to try to get Henry, despite the risk, which this is part of the following her blindly that I was mentioning earlier. They follow her out here, and then all of her men are dying. And even then, her survival instinct isn't kicking in to try to get away. She still tries to get Henry amidst all the chaos. And it just really goes to show that at this point, it really isn't. It is purely a matter of revenge. It is like a revenge above all else, above survival. She doesn't even care if any of her men die. She doesn't care if she lives or dies. The only thing that matters to her is getting revenge on Henry. And then ultimately she ends up getting taken out by that really creepy little kid zombie, which was pretty awesome. But I liked the scene. I liked the use of it. It's clear that it was like a mix of CG and prosthetics, like live action stuff, but I feel like it was pulled off pretty well. I loved the bloater. The bloater was, I don't know, there to me, thinking about the bloater before seeing it, I can see there being some concern that it would come off a little too cheesy or video gamey, but the way that they did it, he looked like he had like the right amount of weight to him. The way that he rips off Perry's head was super cool, and
opened him like a fucking bottle.
Yeah, just right off. So I like that part a lot. It's weird because I don't need scenes like this all the time. You were mentioning how there hasn't been like that much. Like, I mean, there's been a lot of violence in the show, but it's not been focused around like violence and action and these viscerally gory parts. But when they do show up, they hit really well.
Yeah, well said. And another difference, not only the one we just examined, but another difference between the game and the HBO show is Ellie kind of utilizing the horde thinks that she's infected, so they don't focus on her, and that's something obviously that they hint at with Tess as well a few episodes ago, where in this particular Last of Us arc, that's kind of how things work. So she's able to utilize that immunity to move around and do things, which I think is actually pretty interesting, and would have been a really interesting mechanic in the game had the game's world treated it like this, but it didn't. But yeah, I'm glad you brought up Perry's head getting ripped off, because that was obviously super cool. And yeah, just the general hopelessness of the situation as it transpires. I mean, a really important thing to reiterate, and Dig, I don't know if you want to speak to any of this, is that they knew that this horde existed too. It's not like the revenge was so deep that they discovered what would have been, I mean, based on Perry's reaction to it, was like a urgent, like in that world would have been like, oh no, like we have the infected are here in some way. We need to clear them out. And FEDRA's claims that things were cleared out were true, I guess, in an isolated way, but not in its entirety. So, I mean, speak to this however you'd like. I mean, what did you think about this?
Yeah, we'll deal with this later.
Here?
We know this is happening right from the previous episode. We know this is happening, this rumbling underground. But first, we have to get Henry. That's more important. Also, can we just... Henry tells us at some point in the episode, Henry tells us that FEDRA is the one who drove the infected underground. They had the brilliant idea to put the fungus in the cool, dark, damp place. Seems like maybe they didn't know what they, like if you know mushrooms, like that's probably not the best idea to like put them like where they'll thrive. And they did, which is amazing. The first thing I love about Kathleen and this epic showdown is that she's reasoning with Henry at the end, like, it's not all about you. It's not all about this kid. It's not all about this one life. Kids die all the time. People die all the time. But the irony and the hypocrisy there, right? It's so authentically human. Like this whole revenge scheme is based on the death of her brother. She's doing the exact same thing. You know what I mean? And we find out that Michael, her brother, begged her not to do this, would not approve of this at all. Like tells her when he's in prison before he's executed, like, just forgive. And she can't. It's just like she's so inhabited with this darkness. I just love that in the character. But at the same time, she's lashing out against her enemy for the same exact thing. And there's just so much poetic irony in that. I just love that. For this last fight, I love the way they handled it. I love the whole opening up with the stalkers / runners / clickers streaming out. I do disagree with you guys. I feel like for me, and I watched it twice to see if I was being too harsh with the judgment, I feel like the bloater felt a little too video gamey. Like it was like, and here comes the boss battle, type of thing. I don't know if it felt rubber suity to me or the fact of like, it just felt like here comes this overpowered thing and he's ripping people's heads off and stuff.
Here comes the lamp. if we were playing G.I. Joe when we were kids.
I just felt like it's cool. It's fun. But I think when you make a world that feels this grounded and realistic, and I'm already kind of sold on the authenticity of everything, when you make it a little cartoony, it just felt like, all right, it feels like we're kind of echoing the video game maybe a little too much here. Maybe, and the bloater thing, like I understand you want to show the powered up form of it. And I think Neil Druckmann said something weird that I didn't realize was like, when these infected get to this state, they usually kind of go into stasis, go underground and die. But the super powerful ones or the stronger humans, like let's say the John Cena's and Rocks of the world, become like they're too strong to die. So they just become these bloaters. I thought that was kind of a weird explanation, but then it made it even funnier for me of like thinking of like all the muscle men at the gym were the ones that are like, they're not just going to perish underground. They're just going to take it to the next form. They're going to graduate to the next form and rip people's heads off and stuff, which I thought was kind of funny. I think it would have been cool to see them revealed maybe later in a different way that was a little more, I don't know. I don't know the exact way to pull it off. Maybe there was a climate consideration where they got like that. Maybe there was a whole town infested with it. I don't know. But what I really loved here was the way they were handled. Like you guys said, they were super fast and strong and agile. Like it looks like no human could possibly get away, have any real chance of escaping. Like they're super OP. Like they're just beyond human capabilities and that viciousness and that bloodlust and stuff. So I like that it was properly horrific like that. And then kind of put that in with the sniper, which reminded me a little bit of the second half of Full Metal Jacket. I see a lot of like I've seen Aliens along the way. Certainly The Road we've talked about. I've seen Children of Men in some of these episodes. I've seen definitely Full Metal Jacket or some war movies here with the sniper thing. It felt like really like that to me. And I thought it was a different take with the elderly sort of half blind sniper that Joel's able to actually get the drop on and then be like, dude, just that seemed like a reasonable request, right? Like just drop your gun, give us stay here for an hour. You're fine. Give me your gun, like type of thing. I feel like we needed the sniper rifle. So from a video game perspective, I'm glad we got that going out.
That's exactly what I said. I was like, we upgraded our weapons. Now we take it to the bench and we
right.
And we work on it a little bit. But yeah, that sniper scene, if I'm not mistaken, is right out of the game. It's just put in, right, because when you're in that neighborhood, it's actually a pretty memorable scene, and it's also actually a really memorable factions map. That cul-de-sac.
The cul-de-sac like you're going through all.
Yeah, it's like you're going. There's like houses on both sides, and you can like sneak in and out of them as you're like trying to get like to the end of like where there's snipers. But there's also other enemies trying to attack.
Yeah,
you as
game, the sniper has like a small army of people with him.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think it's cool that they are like trying to get these things in here while they can. And I loved like some of even the audio stingers they use. They use like audio stingers like when you're seen in the game or being seen, that kind of that culminating. I wouldn't even try to impersonate it, but it's like a pulse.
Good point.
Almost. And they use it. They use that straight up when the gunfire starts, which I think is also kind of used in Uncharted. That might be both like a Naughty Dog thing. That noise as well. But I dug that. But ultimately, they get out of this really hairy situation somehow. They all survive, but it's not without consequence. As Sam is bitten, and Henry is ultimately forced to shoot him. A little frustrated by this scene, I got to be honest, because it's like, what is Ellie thinking here? I appreciate it. Shows like a lot of her childlike decency. I like when she hugs him and they're writing back and forth on the pad, making the noise that I don't like with it. And so I dig like the emotion and the humanity in it, but it's like you're gonna fall asleep, and then they wake up and he's just sitting there staring out the window, not moving. It's like at that point, I think it would have been even cooler for her to have been like, oh fuck, and then not her approach him, but him realize she's like there and attacks her. Then I just think like little touches like that would have improved it for me. But Dustin, let's go to you on this. What did you think about this last sequence where they seem to be hiding out in, I don't know, some sort of, are they in like a motel or something? I don't know.
Yeah. I'm a little 50-50 on this because I think I agree in that I feel like Ellie would be smarter than this to like her being in the moment of desperation, like trying to like, she cuts her hand and she's like, my blood is medicine or whatever. This last ditch effort. I totally understand. And I actually thought that was kind of an interesting interaction between the two of them. But at the same time, I feel like Ellie would know how dangerous it would be if he's been bitten. That her life is currently in danger. And while I can understand that maybe she knows she can't say anything because she knows that Joel is just going to kill him immediately, but it feels like an overly risky situation. That I don't know. Like I said, I'm a little 50-50 on it. So it's not like I'm saying it's bad, but yeah, I was trying to remember in the game, and maybe this is where you'll have to help enlighten me or help me remember, is that, isn't it like in the game, he blames Joel initially for it happening? How does that all go down, Micah?
To my memory, it's as soon as like Henry, like shoots Sam, he just says like, this is your fault.
Right.
Because in the game, you're take out the sniper, Joel's up in the window, and that's when the infected start to like bum rush them, right? And Joel is doing his best to pick them off so that the group can get away. And that's actually a moment that always frustrates me in the game, is that like Henry does blame Joel, but that is his reaction, is that his first thing to say is like, this is your fault.
Right. Yeah. The one thing that I will say about this climactic part where Henry shoots himself is that I feel like it did have a little more emphasis to it, in that I was thinking about the fact that So obviously his brother is his main reason for living. And once that's gone, what does he have left to live for? And I think that that's, the main kind of takeaway from the game. But in this version where it's clear that Henry knows that what he did to keep him alive was wrong. And so it's like this double now where it's like, okay, the thing I was living for is now gone. And now I have to deal with the fact that the thing that I did that was evil and wrong was now for nothing, because now he didn't even survive anyway. And so not that I'm like, oh yeah, I understand. I mean, I guess you understand more why he had that reaction, I think, more than ever now in this version.
Yeah, fair enough. Micah, do you want to elaborate further?
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll say similar to Dustin, I like the scene that's like the conversation between Ellie and Sam. I liked that a lot. And that is similar to the game of Sam asking, like, do you think the people, on the inside are still the same? I do wish that they had kept that part faithful to the game of like him not revealing the bite, because I don't think it makes any sense for Ellie to keep that secret. I don't think Ellie would truly believe that all she has to do is sprinkle, the holy blood on him and he'll be fine. Like, I just don't think that that's like, as soon as that happened, I was like, this feels a little weird, because Ellie is street smart enough to like, I don't think she'd go for that. But you have to say, okay, well, clearly she just is so overwhelmed at the thought of this small child dying, like she's going to do anything to help. But I didn't really buy it. I am really happy that they did keep their deaths authentic in that way. When we had the scene where Henry, is being confronted by Kathleen, I was like, oh no, what are they changing here? Because their deaths are horrendous as is. And I was like, you can't do this any other way and have it feel the same. So I was relieved that they kept that part the same, but it was just so hard to watch, especially since they made Sam so much younger. Seeing this little tiny kid, attacking Ellie, that was horrifying. And Henry's reaction, like Dustin said, I feel like Henry's reaction definitely made sense in this version of the story, where everything he's done is really just like suddenly brought to the fore. And what do you do at this moment? He doesn't want to continue on. That was really powerful.
Yeah, I agree that, and I don't know, man. There's just something about like everything's falling apart, and like the last thing you have is the human connection of like blood or deep connective friendship or relationship. I don't know. It's crazy how at the very end you'll do anything for that. It seems very instinctual, evolutionary. Dig, what did you think about this end sequence?
Yeah, man, it really got me. It really was a stark reminder of like, I think the overall tone of the series, that they definitely instilled that now. Like, there's no question what we're in for, I think. And, it's really the emotional expedition that they take us on in like just a few minutes at the end of this episode. If you just look at it from the top, Ellie's like blood magic thing was a little strange. You could kind of chalk that up to what you guys said, or just childhood naivete or ignorance or over optimism, or just not wanting to. We know she has such a problem with Joel's pessimism and his cynicism and just being a kid. Maybe it's a little bit of that, but just coming out of that battle with the sniper, with the infected, it seemed like we're out of the woods, right? We somehow survived that encounter. Joel is inviting Henry along on the journey. We're seeing Joel's goodness, maybe a little bit of his heroic quality shining through. They're becoming a foursome now. The gang just grew by 2. Oh. And Ellie and Sam have forged this friendship. They have each other. Everything looks good. They have a little bit of quality of life because, really, in not so uncertain terms, they have like a playmate in each other now, right? So it looks like everything's on the up and up. And then all of a sudden, it just, in about 30 seconds, everything just goes tragically to shit. And how quickly it fell apart, and the trauma in that, with sort of poor Sam getting infected. We know this poor deaf kid. First of all, I have to applaud them by casting an actual deaf kid for the role. I thought that was so classy. so authentic. That's Kevon Woodard. He did such an amazing job in that role. But just how quickly, like the whole thing, all this, it seems like all these positive developments end up in this kind of like Mexican standoff real quick. It's somehow in that moment, Henry decides to do the right thing and shoot his brother. He's an 8-year-old kid. You see the blood spat on the wall. He's lying in a pool of blood. This is an 8-year-old, right? And then Henry, I really kind of read into that, like his shock in that moment of making that snap judgment and the ensuing sort of PTSD, and just, 5 seconds later shoots himself in the head and they're gone. And that literally happens in like 30 to 40 seconds. It was just shocking. And it really painted a picture of what you think now of this world. There is no sentimental, there is no happy ending. This is the way of things now, and Henry is such an interesting character because it's such a tragic character, because we know that in the heat of battle, he gave in order to save his little brother, that he basically sold this Christ-like figure in Kathleen's brother down the river for some medication. And that this guy might have been the savior of this part of the country, but Henry was protecting his own. And he felt legitimate remorse for that. He calls himself the bad guy and everything like that. But I love, Micah was saying this earlier too, Henry's personality, his sort of, the way he kind of just didn't go in for violence, the way he wanted to do it another way, the way he had Joel dead to rights and really authentically did not want to hurt him. We see the good side of Henry too. And I think if he stayed alive, we would be rooting for that good side, for him to forgive himself and move on and all that kind of stuff. We're never going to get that. You know what I mean? So the show just takes a stance of like, again, there's not going to be a happy ending. This is the decisive way it's going to end. And the way it seems to affect Joel and Ellie in the end of the episode, we have about another minute before we go to black on this episode. It just ends on that harsh, unforgiving note. But also the way Joel's taking the time to bury those bodies, and it seems like Ellie's just over it. Like she's seen one too many bad things. I'm a little worried for her going into episode 6, because is this a straw that broke the camel's back? You know what I mean? Is that the complete loss of innocence now? Is it over? Is there no turning back for Ellie now? She's an adult, trial by fire. She's an adult now. There's no more little kid. There's no more endure and survive comic books, crayons. Like it's, she's thrust into this world and the misery of this world.
Yeah, it's bleak. And it is, you're right. I'm glad you brought up Joel burying the bodies, because I thought that was quite symbolic, as well as he continues to soften, and maybe Ellie's almost on the different trajectory, but perhaps they meet somewhere in the middle, because Joel understands things but doesn't want it, and Ellie neither wants it nor understands it, and so they're coming from a different place. But let's go around the horn one more time and kind of hit some closing comments, expectations, feelings, whatever the case might be. Michael, let's go to you first. My dearest one, what do you think going into the next into the next episode?
I'm really excited for the next one. This one was fantastic. Highlighted again Joel's entire reasoning for the concept that having a partner in this world can only be detrimental. The idea that this can only lead to your doom in some sense. Looking at what happened to Henry and Sam, looking at what happened to Kathleen, it's just a reminder of Joel's entire motivation for not wanting to be close to Ellie is that the moment in which you truly care for someone, you can lose yourself to it completely. So I think this episode had everything between action, emotion, tension, and I'm really excited for the next one. I'm already just like impatiently waiting.
Right on. Yeah, me too. And we don't have to wait quite as long. No, we actually, because we waited so long, we don't have. Yeah. So I was going to say, people that watched it on time, though, will have to have waited even longer, which is unfortunate for them. But Dustin, let's go to you, my other dearest one.
Yeah, I'm excited about the next episode. I don't watch the previews that show you whatever the little bit of the next episode was, but I happened to see a little bit of it just because I was letting it play while I was looking at my phone or something. And I saw the snowy environment for the next one. And it's funny because it feels like a game where you're like, oh, the environment's changing. And now it's kind of like feels fresh again. And it feels kind of the same way for a show, just be in a totally new environment, maybe some reunions with characters. I am really excited to see how we're now into the final, what we said, 4 episodes, right? So we're kind of, we're closer to the end now.
Yeah, we're over the hump.
We're over the hump.
Yeah.
So it's only going to get more interesting from here on out.
And finally, my Dagan, what do you think about?
I'm all yours.
What's going on here?
You know what? I love the continuing momentum of quality. 5 episodes in. I think we're deep enough now to know for sure that the show is the real deal. It's not going to let us down. That's my prediction. And, shout out to Lamar Johnson, who played Henry. I thought that was a really charismatic performance. And I think that the complexity of that personality and what that character is sort of tasked with emotionally really came through in the performance in subtle ways. The acting in this show is astounding. And the only sad part is losing these characters, like our beloved Bill and Frank in episode 3. We only get 1 episode of them. But I think there's like an overarching theme of leaving us wanting more. And I think that's always a good thing.
I think that this story with Sam and Henry acts as a prelude and an echo of Joel's experience with Ellie. And Joel doesn't yet know the decision he's going to make if things go the way that they go in the show to bring him basically parallel to the entire Sam and Henry saga. And I like that it kind of takes a little bit of time to outline that in the show, although it does it in the game as well. It just happens in a different way. But I'm excited as well about the next episode. 2 things I wanted to say was just from a visual point of view, and this is just a Colin Moriarty thing, is I love officer characters with pistols, and they did that with Kathleen in the final fight. She had like a pistol attached to her leg, and all the other guys have rifles. I just love that aesthetic. I've always loved that aesthetic. I always talk about how Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan is like the epitome of that aesthetic when he's shooting at the tank with the pistol. And so I just always loved that visual. And I wanted to just shout that out. And the other thing I have to say, and just to be totally fair, because I call it like it is that for me, the PS5 HBO Max app is just totally broken. And
confirmed.
And it's just fucked. I deleted it and reinstalled it. I don't know what's going on with that. And it doesn't seem to be at all common. I haven't looked, but I imagine that it's not a huge deal, but it's just another one of those examples of something with PS5 where it's like your own ghost in the machine, and that's it. And so I just wanted to call that out. That it's just unworkable. I'm sorry, go ahead. The
TV app, no problem.
Yeah, no problem. For us as well. When we use the smart TV app, it's the same thing. I just think that's so peculiar. All things considered. Strange. It was like better this time, but there was just by the end, it was just skipping audio constantly by the end.
That's awful.
What is going on? And if you like stop it and try to fast forward or rewind, you just like it just won't do it, and then it just crashes.
Bad timing.
And you have to like restart. Yeah, it's just strange. I just thought that was strange, but it seems to be a Colin problem. But I wanted to call it out nonetheless. But we'll collect next week for our thoughts on episode 6 of The Last of Us on HBO. Hope you're enjoying it out there, and hope you've enjoyed the game as well, or the games. And we'll have much more to say about all of that in the future. Thank you so much for your loving kindness and support of all things Last Stand Media, Sacred Symbols Plus, etc. We'll see you next time for more. Until then, goodbye.
See ya.
Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand's shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.